This week, our Bible reading is in Acts chapter 5, though it certainly has some connections back with
Right.
Acts chapter 4, especially, probably most obviously, that last little section from verses 32 to verse 37, where we have this beautiful picture how the disciples were of one heart and one soul,
Right.
and giving and helping each other. And boy, that really builds up the drama for what's going to be from a beautiful picture to a really ugly scene.
Sharp
A
contrast.
sharp contrast when we move into chapter 5. Somebody told me one time, be careful when you're on top of the hill, because there's only one way to go.
Down.
So we're on top of the hill in
Right.
4. Things are about to go down in 5. So if you want to think of a theme for the chapter, how about we just choose trouble?
Yeah.
Because that's what they're going to have. They're going to have a lot of trouble. And this time from two directions. We've seen the external
Right.
from opponents. That's going to continue. But in 5, we're also going to see the internal. So
Right.
we're segmenting this. Pay attention through 1 through 11. That's where we have the Ananias and Sapphira story. Again, tethered to that scene at the end of 4, because it's all about giving
Right.
and helping people. But these guys are frauds.
Right.
They play the hypocrite. They want the credit without the sacrifice.
Right.
And what they don't anticipate is God saying, I know what you did.
That's right. That's right. When you look at that story carefully, I mean, there's a number of warning signs right there. They decide to keep back. And of course, we're not reading this in Greek, but in the early church they were. And that word that's actually used there, they kept back part in verse 2. Same word in the Septuagint for when Achan kept part of Jericho. Yeah,
interesting.
So if
Yeah.
you're reading this in Greek and you're a Jewish Christian who knows your Old Testament, you already know something bad's going on here. But the point is, to your point, David, is Peter pushes both of them. You're testing, you're trying the Holy Spirit. The sin of lying is the quintessential satanic sin. And so this is, and in fact, Peter even says to Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? And so, this literal satanic invasion into the church where the Spirit's power, I mean, again, has been miraculously evident. It's kind of like, the church version of touching the ark, when God is very present. You look at the place being shaken there where they had been praying in chapter 4 and verse 31. Great power, chapter 4, verse 33, the apostles are doing. Later on in chapter 5 here in verse 12, the Spirit continues its work as the signs and wonders of the apostles are being worked. And so in the middle of all this great outpouring of the Holy Spirit's presence and power, you dare to lie to the Holy Spirit and try to be a fake Christian, or at least a fake generous Christian. And so God engages in the first episode of church discipline.
Well, and that's an interesting point to make there, because I think people would be disturbed that not only do people die here,
Right.
but they die at the hand of the Lord.
Right.
And I think that, but that doesn't fit, I think, the way some imagine God
Right.
and New Testament Christianity,
Right.
that things like this aren't supposed to happen. And to me, one of the carry-away lessons from all of that is that God takes all of this quite serious, and
More than we do sometimes.
well, and I think that's the other piece. I
Right.
mean, there's in our generation just a backlash against church discipline.
Right.
Which, is it fair to say that's at least milder in form than what it takes here?
Right.
And so God, in essence, I think, gives a demonstration here that the
Right.
church has to be protected from those who would corrupt it, from corrupting influences
And
like
we
these two.
forget that too about church discipline, David. It's certainly to restore a sinner, but it is to protect the church, its holiness as well.
It's a twofold purpose,
it
and
is.
both of those are
It
vital
is.
purposes. Okay,
It is.
so we are going to move beyond just the first 11 verses. The second segment to watch for as you read would go from verses 12 to 16, and that's sort of coming out of the story. And the focus here is really on signs, and you may
Right.
want to say a word about that. I just think it's interesting to focus on the coming out of the story. I mean, this didn't mark the end of the church. Everything didn't fall apart and everyone go their separate ways.
Right.
But instead, as we'll see with all of their adversities, they always press forward and keep going.
Right. Right, and what's interesting about that is you do see a little bit, verse 13, none of the rest dared join them, but the people held them in high esteem. But more than ever, believers were added to the Lord. It did sober up those who were coming, those who were
Yeah.
coming because it was new and interesting, perhaps, versus those who were truly being converted to the message of Jesus Christ and understood what was at stake in it. But that's right. I mean, the church does continue on, and it seems to be pure. But the great signs and symbols, of the healings and the casting out of unclean spirits, that God is truly at work in this, is very much there for those with eyes to see, which is important because of the observation Gamaliel is going to make in the next section.
Yep, and then to me, the signs partnered with the teaching shows the way New Testament teaching worked. Absent a divine book, these guys have to have some way to authenticate that their message is from God, and the signs verify that. Last segment to pay attention to begins at verse 17, and then really it runs all the way to the end of the chapter, and now opposition comes from a different direction. Now their adversaries reappear, and they're arrested and put in jail, and you have that whole process you'll read about as you go through the chapter there. But since you brought him up, I thought Gamaliel's counsel was so good toward the end of all of that.
Spoke truer than he knew, perhaps.
Well, yeah, but it does make sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And that's one of those people, again, you think is at least, maybe close to the kingdom, maybe on the right track. Just, like some other characters in the Bible, figures in the Bible, we don't know how his story ends. But he rightly recognizes if God's at work in this, we can't beat this. And so we need to be careful what we do with this man, because at least Gamaliel is apparently wondering about these signs and wonders as verification of what these men are saying.
If God's at work in this, we can't beat this. Do you think we need to repeat that every week?
Yeah.
In our generation, and be reminded for all of our fretting and worrying, if this is of God, men will not be able to defeat it. I love the end of the chapter where it says they kept right on preaching Jesus as the Christ. Whatever came, troubles within, external adversity, they just kept on preaching Jesus. And that's our responsibility, brothers and sisters, in our generation. Maybe that's a good takeaway to soak on this week as we read this chapter, that no matter what comes, we need to keep on preaching Jesus.